Folks say the sun don't rise over Black Hollow Canyon. It just hangs there like a noose, waiting for a neck. Heat rises from the cracked earth like breath from a dying man's lips, and the wind moves in listless circles, stirring up ash and bone dust alike. The place was cursed long before Marrow Pass ever had a name, before the railway tracks rusted, before the last righteous man in this country turned to sin. And in the middle of that dead stretch of land, there's a hole. A cruel, jagged pit carved into the canyon floor by some act of God or devil. No one rightly knows which. The folks here call it the Vulture Hole. It ain't on any map, but every man, woman, and child from Crosswater to Devil's Ridge knows it's where Sheriff Calkin Grady sends the ones he don't want buried proper. No trial, no stone, just the pit, the sun, and the birds. They drag her out at dusk. The girl was a scrap of a thing, all dirt and bone, with blood crusted along the side of her face, and dark hair matted to her jaw. Her hands were bound in front of her with coarse hemp rope, and her lips cracked when she spoke, though no one cared to listen. 3 of Grady's deputies hauled her up the canyon trail, their laughter carrying like smoke in the air. She stumbled once on a loose stone and caught a boot in the ribs for her trouble. Sheriff Grady rode behind them on his black mare, a silhouette against the dying light. His wide-brimmed hat threw a shadow over his eyes, but the crooked grin below it was plain as day. He always wore that grin when his justice was on display. They reached the Vulture Hole, and the girl stood for a moment at its edge, barefoot and shivering. The wind picked up her hair and flung it across her face. The pit yawned beneath her 12 feet wide, its sides sheer and jagged, old blood staining the rocks below. Grady dismounted, spat a stream of tobacco-stained spit into the dust, and stepped close. "Marrow Pass don't abide murderers," he said, though no one had called a town meeting nor spoken a word of evidence. "Law's the law. Ain't no preacher, no judge, no jury between you and the dirt now." The girl lifted her face, eyes swollen near shut. She said nothing, but Grady's grin twitched. He didn't like it when they stayed quiet. "Throw her in," he ordered. The deputies grabbed her by the arms and legs, and though she struggled, there was no strength in her. She was half-starved, skin stretched tight over ribs. A lone vulture circled overhead, wings black against the sky. One deputy hesitated. "Sheriff, maybe we ought." Grady turned on him like a rattler. "You want to keep your tongue, boy, you'll shut it." And they hurled her into the pit. She hit the rock bottom with a hollow crack. Dust billowed up. One of the deputies laughed. Grady tipped his hat back, squinting down into the darkness. The girl didn't move. "Won't be long now," Grady muttered. "Nothing lives down there come morning." He turned his horse and rode back toward town, the deputies in his wake, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the dusk. Back in Marrow Pass, the saloon was thick with heat and sour whiskey. Men sat hunched over cards, pretending they didn't hear the talk or see the look in each other's eyes. Only one man spoke about what had happened. Old Harper, grizzled and half-pickled by drink, leaned against the bar and scratched his stubble. His voice rasped like dry grass when he spoke. "Ain't no ordinary girl, that one," he said to no one in particular. "I seen her before. Years back, when I was working cattle up near Dead Elm Creek. Fellow with a red birthmark on his face tried to take her. She near tore his throat out with her teeth. Mark my words, she's got coyote in her blood." The bartender grunted. "Drink your damn whiskey, Harper." But someone else was listening. A man sat alone in the corner, back to the wall, brim of his hat shadowing his face. Dust caked his long coat, and a worn book rested on the table before him, untouched. He neither spoke nor drank, though his fingers tapped idly on the table in time with the rise and fall of Harper's voice. When Harper turned his gaze toward him, he swore he saw a flicker of something. Recognition, maybe, or grief. But the man didn't look up. "Suit yourself," Harper mumbled, and took another pull from his glass. That night, when the town's lamps flickered low and the wind picked up the dust in the streets, a lone figure stood at the edge of Black Hollow Canyon. The moon hung pale and sickly, painting the pit in hues of bone and ash. The figure knelt, peering down into the darkness. Far below, the girl stirred. One arm moved, scraping against the stone, and a soft, ragged sound, half cough, half word, drifted up. The man at the rim of the pit didn't speak, didn't reach down, just watched, and the vultures circled above them both. Jonas Wake came into Marrow Pass like a shadow sliding between lamplight and dust. Nobody saw him ride in, and no one could say from which road he came. The dawn was breaking pale when he tied his worn, sweat-darkened mare to the hitching post outside the saloon and stepped down. A tall, lean man with a coat faded by sun and storm, its hems frayed like a prayer left too long in the wind. A battered Bible, stained dark along its leather spine, hung from a thong at his hip beside a six-shot revolver whose bluing had long since worn away. The preacher's face was a map of old hurt, eyes the color of storm-cloud glass, set deep under a broad brow, and a scar beneath his left ear like a half-moon crescent. No one spoke to him that first morning. The few who looked up from their business, gutting fish, splitting fence rails, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt, turned their eyes down fast. This was a town used to wolves and preachers' clothing, and Jonas Wake didn't much look like salvation. He made his way to the small, half-collapsed church at the edge of town. The roof sagged. The bell was rusted and green with weather. He stood in the doorway for a long while before stepping inside, where light pooled through cracked windows like dirty water. Dust hung in thick strands, catching in his throat as he opened the Bible, its pages stiff with old blood, and spoke to no one. "Mercy," he said quietly, voice rough and steady. "Ain't for the clean. It's for those in the mud, and every man in this town's knee-deep in it." The wind rattled the walls. He closed the book. In town, talk churned over coffee and whiskey about the girl in the canyon, though none dared say her name. Some claimed she was a witch, others a vagrant. The truth was harder, heavier, and it lay buried beneath Grady's thick-heeled boot. Anora had been a child of the pass, taken in after her mother drowned in the river east of town, orphaned young, grown with the other unwanted in a room above the old mill. Sheriff Grady made a point of placing the town's orphans in work, but those who paid attention knew many of those placements meant they vanished. It was Anora who'd found the ledger, an old cloth-bound book in the sheriff's own hand, names and dates and destinations scribbled in crooked lines, names of girls sent to the far mines, never seen again. She'd taken it, run through the night, with it clutched to her chest, until Grady caught her. No trial, no words, just the vulture hole. Jonas heard the old stories from Harper, slumped in the corner of the saloon that evening. Harper was drunk, same as most nights, eyes glassy and rimmed red. "Ain't no ordinary girl, preacher," Harper croaked, leaning in close. The sour stench of rotgut curled from his mouth. "She's coyote-born, that one. Got a mark somewhere on her skin, same shape as a crescent moon. I seen it when she was just a pup, running wild along the ridges. Always said she'd be the end of this place." Jonas sipped at his water, watching the flame in the lantern gutter. "End of it, you say?" "Kenyon's cursed," Harper whispered. "Eats what it's fed. But not her. Not her." Jonas rose without a word. The Bible swung against his side as he stepped into the street, night coiling like smoke around him. Deputy Varn leaned against the rail outside the jailhouse, a narrow, sharp-faced man with hungry eyes. He flicked a match to his cheroot and gave Jonas a long, sideways glance. "Evenin', preacher," Varn said with a crooked grin. "You lookin' to save a few lost sheep. You picked the wrong flock." Jonas tipped his hat, eyes unreadable in the shadow. "Some flocks need wolves driven out first." Varn snorted, but something in the preacher's tone made his hand twitch toward the butt of his gun. Jonas passed on in silence, making his way down the rocky trail that led out of town. The moon hung low, pale and sickly over Black Hollow Canyon, casting the land in a colorless glow. Coyotes yipped far off. Somewhere, a vulture's wing cut the still air. He reached the rim of the vulture hole and stood there, peering down into the darkness. The smell hit first, old blood, scorched earth, sun-baked bone. Below, a pale shape shifted weakly, a hand scrabbling against stone. Jonas crouched, the revolver heavy at his side. "You still breathing, girl?" A cough rose from the pit, wet and raw. Then a voice, no louder than a dying breeze. Why? She rasped. He considered that a long moment, eyes fixed on the moonlit rise of the land beyond. Because you don't die here, he murmured. You live with me. He uncoiled a length of rope from his saddle, tying a knot as he spoke. You got a name? A ragged breath. Anora. Jonas nodded. Good. You hold on, Anora. The vultures circled above, 3 of them, their black shapes blotting stars as Jonas lowered the rope. She was too weak to climb, so he went down. The rocks bit at his palms, and the air grew close, thick with old death. He reached her, skin clammy and cracked, one eye swollen shut, blood matting her temple. Still, when he touched her shoulder, she flinched and showed teeth. There's the coyote in you, he muttered. She tried to sit, failed. I ain't dead yet, she whispered. Jonas smiled then, for the first time in a long time. Not a soft smile. A wolf's grin. No, he said. You're not. He lifted her, light as a bundle of dry sticks, and slung her arm around his shoulder. The vultures above croaked in protest. Jonas raised his voice to the sky. Not tonight, you bastards. And began the slow, bloody climb out of the pit. The shack had no door and only half a roof, the walls leaning like drunkards in the dark. It sat along the dry creek bed south of town, hidden by scrub and dying mesquite. Jonas carried Anora there, her weight of breath against his shoulder, her skin hot and broken under his hand. The night air smelled of dust and dry sage, and the wind hissed through the canyon like a whispering crowd. By the time he laid her on the makeshift cot inside, her eyes had rolled back and sweat slicked her brow. He worked in silence, pouring water from his canteen into her cracked lips, tearing strips from his own shirt to bind the worst of her wounds. He'd done this before, the careful tending of broken bodies, but it had always been in different places, for different reasons. On battlefields slick with mud, in outlaw hideouts, in backroom saloons where men bled out for coins, never for a girl left for vultures. Morning came mean and pale, a sour light cutting through the gaps in the shack's roof. Anora stirred, a low sound in her throat. Her face was gray and sunken, but there was something unbroken in her eyes when they finally found him. You should have left me, she croaked. Jonas crouched by the cot, a battered tin cup in hand. Not my way. She tried to lift herself, grimacing against the pain. He held the cup to her mouth. Drink. It took a while, but she managed it. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier though thin. They'll come. Grady'll send them soon as he finds out. He's got to find us first. You don't know this place, preacher. He gave a small, humorless smile. I know men like him. She watched him then, eyes narrowing as if seeing something just beyond the skin. You've killed. Jonas didn't flinch. I have. Was it righteous? He thought about that, staring out at the flat line of land beyond the broken wall. The scar on his jaw itched under the memory of old ghosts. Once, he said, a long time ago. Before she could press him further, a sound came from outside. Hoofbeats, sharp and urgent, moving too quick to be casual. Jonas rose, hand brushing the grip of his revolver. But it wasn't a deputy. It was Doc Ellis. The old physician looked like he hadn't slept in days. His gray hair clung damp to his head, and his jacket hung loose on narrow shoulders. He dismounted fast, eyes darting, voice low. God damn it, Jonas. You don't know what you've stepped in. I reckon I do, Jonas said. Ellis came inside, knelt by Anora, his hands quick and sure as he checked the fever in the cuts. He sighed, pulling a bottle from his bag. They'll burn this shack down with you both in it if they catch you here. Grady's already losing his grip. That girl's the one thread holding what's left of his lies together. Jonas folded his arms. Then maybe it's time someone pulled that thread. Anora's lips trembled. There's a ledger, she whispered. Ellis went still. Jonas leaned closer. What ledger? She closed her eyes a moment, gathering the words. It's in the old storage cellar behind the smithy. I hid it there the night they caught me. Names. Places. Grady's been selling folks for years, not just to the mining camps. There's a man nobody sees him. They just call him the broker. He buys labor for the rail lines out in the high mountains. places no one comes back from. Ellis cursed under his breath, glancing toward the door. I warned you, he muttered to Jonas. This town ain't got a soul left to save. Jonas' mouth twitched, not quite a smile. I ain't here to save it. Just burn out the rot. Ellis fished out a small flask and pressed it into Jonas' hand. For the pain, if you're still fool enough to try. Always been fool enough. Before Ellis could leave, the sound of hoofbeats came again, multiple riders this time, sharp and angry. Jonas moved to the door, peering through a gap in the wall. Dust rose in the distance, where 6 horses rode fast toward town. Varn found the pit empty, Ellis said. Grady's called a hunt. Every bastard in Marrow Pass with a badge or a grudge is carrying a rifle now. Jonas drew his revolver, checked the cylinder. Time to finish this. Ellis hesitated. You can still ride out, preacher. Nobody would fault you. Jonas' gaze was steady, something old and cold behind it. I leave now, she dies. And this town keeps feeding its own to the wolves. I won't abide that. Ellis clapped a hand to his shoulder once, hard, then turned and rode fast toward the hills. Jonas looked to Anora. You think you can stand? Enough to shoot. Good. We've got a ledger to fetch. They waited until dusk. The air turned thick and yellow, a sickness in the sky that made men spit and women lock their doors early. In the saloon, the mood curdled. Cards slapped harder on the tables. Glasses clinked more nervous. Even Harper kept his tongue still, though his red-rimmed eyes never left the door. Grady stormed in just before nightfall, spurs jangling, fury riding his face. The room went quiet as the grave. Whoever's hiding them, Grady barked. Best speak now. I'll burn this town to cinders to find him. No one answered, but Jonas was already there, leaning against the back wall, hat low, revolver at his hip. Grady's gaze fell on him, lip curling. I should have known it'd be you, preacher, he sneered, carrying your Bible in one hand and your death warrant in the other. Jonas didn't move. You're no preacher, Grady spat. Jonas lifted his head, eyes cold. I carry no salvation for men like you. The room held its breath. The tension was a rope stretched tight, waiting for one word to snap it. But Jonas didn't draw. Not yet. I'll see you hang, Grady promised, turning to leave. Sun up, both of you. Jonas let him go. The time wasn't right. Not yet. Anora was waiting in the alley behind the saloon, a rifle clutched in her shaking hands. Her color was better, her grip steady. Well, she asked. Jonas's jaw set. Tonight, he said. We end this tonight. The night hung heavy over Marrow Pass, the sky churning with low clouds the color of old bruises. Jonas and Anora moved like shadows through back alleys, the scent of dust and oil thick in the air. Every step toward the smithy felt like walking deeper into the heart of a storm. The town was restless, windows shuttered, lanterns dimmed. No coyotes called. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Jonas led them through the narrow path behind the cooper's shed, keeping to the dark where the lamplight didn't reach. Anora clutched the rifle tight in her hands, face pale, but set. The bruises on her cheek had turned a sickly yellow. Her lips still split, but her eyes burned. They reached the old storage cellar behind the smithy, its door sagging on one rusted hinge. Jonas tested it, then swung it open. Stay close, he muttered. Inside it was cooler, the scent of old wood and spilled oil thick. A single lantern flickered weakly in the far corner. Anora crouched by the pile of rotting sacks, her fingers scraping at loose boards. It's here, she whispered. I hit it right. Her hand froze. There was nothing beneath the boards. No ledger. No worn cloth binding. No ink-stained pages. She searched again, frantic now, her breath catching in her throat. Jonas moved in beside her, felt the hollow space beneath the floorboards with calloused fingers. Empty. Anora sat back hard against the wall, eyes wide, chest heaving. No, it was here. It was here. Jonas rose slowly, jaw clenched. His eyes searched the room, then settled on the faint scuff of a boot print near the door. Not his. Not Anora's. Someone had known. They slipped out into the night, Anora trembling with rage and fear. There's only one man who knew where it was, Jonas said, voice like gravel. They found Doc Ellis in his shop, a single candle guttering on the counter. The old man sat slumped in a chair, bottle dangling from his fingers, the deep lines in his face deeper than before. When he saw them, his face crumpled, and he set the bottle aside with shaking hands. I didn't have a choice, he whispered. Jonas stepped forward, his hand hovering over the grip of his revolver. Where is it? Ellis looked down at his hands. Grady, he came this morning. Had my boy. Put a rope round his neck right outside my own house. Said he'd hang him right there if I didn't turn it over. I didn't mean to, God help me, but Honora's voice was raw, jagged. You gave him the ledger. Ellis's face collapsed into his palms. I'm sorry. Jonas stared at him, expression unreadable. The preacher in him warred with something far darker. He turned without a word and walked out into the street. The church bell rang once, then again. A summons. The people of Merrow Pass gathered in the square by lantern light, muttering to one another, faces pale in the gloom. The gallows had been rebuilt in the center of town, its rough-hewn frame already casting long, crooked shadows. Atop the platform stood Grady, swaggering and grinning like a man who'd tamed the world. Deputy Varn flanked him, rifle in hand. Grady's voice boomed across the square. This town has suffered too long under the hand of liars, thieves, and killers, he bellowed. Tonight we put an end to it. The crowd parted as two deputies dragged a man forward. Jonas, blood on his cheek, hands bound, but he stood straight, gaze steady. His coat hung open, the Bible still slung at his side. Honora watched from the alley's shadow, her heart twisting. It wasn't her on the gallows. It was him. Grady turned toward the people. This man ain't no preacher, he spat. Name's Jonas Wake. Some of you might remember him by another. Pale Rider. A killer. Bounty man. Cut down 30 men and women out in Kansas in one night. Rode with bloody hands till he vanished. He's come here to stir poison, and now he'll answer for it. The crowd murmured, some gasping, others looking to one another as though afraid to meet a neighbor's eye. Jonas said nothing. Honora's blood ran cold. Pale Rider. The name struck a bell in her memory. Whispers she'd heard as a girl, of a bounty killer who left no one breathing, man, woman, or child if a price was laid on their heads. Vanished years back. It couldn't be him. She slipped through the shadows, finding old Harper hunched by the saloon stoop, swigging from a bottle. She grabbed his sleeve. Is it true? She hissed. Is he Pale Rider? Harper peered at her, eyes bleary but clear enough. He rasped. Rode with death in his pocket, that one. Killed a whole camp in Kansas, long ago. Took a bullet in the gut, left to die. Folks said he was dead. Guess some ghosts don't stay buried. Honora's hands trembled, but the fire inside her didn't falter. She looked back to the gallows, to Jonas standing there beneath the noose. The man who dragged her from that pit. Whatever he'd been, he wasn't that anymore. Grady gestured to Varn. String him up. Varn stepped forward, grinning. Honora knew she couldn't reach Jonas in time. The rifle she carried was no good in a crowd like this. But there was one way. She ducked behind the saloon, slipping through a side door into the kitchen. Her eyes scanned the shelves until they fell on a rusted can of lamp oil. She grabbed it in a rag, her mind a storm. If she couldn't cut him down, she'd burn down the gallows around him. The bell tolled again. Grady shouted, At dawn, we end this. He wanted to savor it, a public hanging with the sun rising over his power. The people would watch, remember who held the rope. It was how men like him kept their hold. Honora melted back into the night, the oil can grip tight, heart hammering like a drum. The sun would rise soon, and so would the fire. The sky was the color of old bone when the town gathered. Merrow Pass moved like cattle in the half-light, eyes hollow, faces drawn tight, with the same brutal fear they'd worn for years. The gallows stood in the square like a crooked finger pointed at heaven, the noose swaying lazily in the dawn breeze. Vultures wheeled above, black shapes against a sickly gray sky, as though they too had gathered for the spectacle. Jonas Wake stood beneath the rope, his coat gone, shirt clinging to bloodied skin. His face was calm, the storm-gray eyes steady, watching the town as if memorizing each man, each sin. The noose hung beside him, frayed and waiting. Grady preened on the platform like a rooster fat with stolen grain. His voice carried over the restless crowd. "Let this be a lesson," he crowed, "to any who think themselves bigger than the law of this town. Bigger than me." Deputy Varn stood to one side, rifle in hand, a crooked grin pasted to his face. The vultures overhead let out a single, long cry, as if answering some unspoken signal. From the hills beyond the town, in the last clumps of dead brush, Enora lay flat in the dust, rifle balanced across a rock. The stock was rough against her cheek, the iron sight aligned with Varn's smug face. Her pulse beat heavy in her ears. Jonas lifted his head and, as if he could feel her watching, met her eyes from across the distance. There was no plea in his gaze. No resignation either. Just a promise. She took a slow breath. Varn leaned forward to tighten the noose. Her finger closed on the trigger. The crack of the rifle split the dawn clean in two. Varn jerked back, a burst of red blooming from his throat. The crowd screamed. Varn dropped hard, his rifle clattering against the wood. Grady spun, shouting orders, but chaos surged like a flood. The townsfolk scattered, men shoving women aside, boots hammering dirt. Some screamed. Others ducked for cover. A second shot rang out, sending another of Grady's men crashing down the steps. Jonas moved fast. He ducked under the rope, shoulder-checked the nearest deputy, who scrambled for a weapon. Blood misted the air as Jonas grabbed a fallen rifle and swung the butt hard, sending the man sprawling. Grady bolted, shoving through the tangle of townsfolk. His hand fumbled for a revolver at his hip, but fear turned his limbs clumsy. Jonas vaulted from the gallows platform, landing light in the dirt, and came after him. The two men raced through the chaos, Grady panting like a cornered hog, Jonas a ghost at his heels. Enora gave chase from the side, rifle in hand, slipping between overturned barrels and panicked townsfolk. Grady burst through the doors of the old church, the warped wood slamming open, dust swirling in shafts of broken light. The place was ruin, shattered pews, warped hymnals, colored glass strewn like spilled jewels. The only sound was Grady's ragged breath. Jonas stepped in behind him. Grady turned, revolver raised, hand trembling. "You should have stayed dead, Pale Rider," he snarled. Jonas moved slow, unarmed, his voice steady. "Maybe I should have." Grady spat, fury and terror mingling. "I know what you are. A killer. Always were. Always will be." Jonas's gaze didn't waver. "I was a killer. I wore blood like a badge, until I saw what I'd become. Left a field full of bodies in Kansas, men and women both. Some deserved it. Most didn't. I rode till the land swallowed my name. And then I tried to bury it." Grady's finger twitched on the trigger. "And now," the sheriff hissed. Jonas's voice dropped low, cold as winter rain. "Now for her, I'll dig it up one last time." The shot rang out, deafening in the hollow church. Grady's bullet missed, carving splinters from the doorframe. Jonas closed the distance in a breath, his hand lashing out, knocking the revolver aside. The two men crashed into a broken pew, fists flying. Grady fought like a man who feared the grave, savage and desperate. Jonas fought like a man who'd made peace with it long ago. It was over quick. Jonas drove Grady back against the altar, blood smeared on both their faces. He forced the sheriff down, knee to chest. The old revolver turned on its master. Grady's breath hitched. "You can't," he croaked. "You're a preacher." Jonas bared his teeth. "I ain't been a preacher since Kansas." He fired. Grady's body went still, head lolling to one side. Blood pooled beneath him, soaking into the cracked floorboards. Jonas stood, chest heaving, eyes on the stained glass overhead, where a fractured angel stared back. Behind him, Enora entered the church, rifle slung across her back. She looked at the ruin, at Jonas, at the dead man. "It's done," she said. "No," Jonas murmured. "Not yet." They dragged Grady's body through the silent streets as the sun rose over the canyon's edge. Townsfolk crept from hiding, wide-eyed and silent, watching the spectacle with the same hushed awe as a storm rolling over the hills. At the Vulture Hole, Jonas hefted the corpse and tossed it into the pit where Aunt Nora had once been left for the birds. The vultures came eagerly. "Let him rot where he buried others," Jonas said. Back in the square, Aunt Nora soaked the gallows in lamp oil. The ledger Grady had stolen clutched in her hand. Pages of names. Lives sold and lost. She dropped it at the base of the platform. Jonas struck the match. The flames took fast, climbing the wood like eager hands. The gallows cracked and groaned, firelight painting the town's faces in shades of orange and gold. No one spoke. When the ashes cooled, Jonas saddled his horse. And Nora mounted beside him, bruised but unbroken. They rode out as the sun broke clean over the ridge. In the saloon, old Harper tipped his bottle and murmured to no one. "I told you," he said, voice rough with smoke and drink. "She didn't die there.